Hi friends, Father Kerry here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one asking the question, is hell really other people? You and I are humans, aren't we? And we know from our experience that sometimes other humans annoy us, either individuals or groups of individuals. They annoy us so much that we want to wash our hands of them and just get away from it all. Go off on an island somewhere, be by ourselves. This is a normal human experience, but there is at least one thinker who has taken that normal human experience of annoyance to the nth degree, and that person is the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, who says that hell is other people. So what I would like to do here is to ask myself and you, is that really the case? Is it the case that other people constitute our hell? The expression hell is other people, l'enfer c'est les autres, was introduced in 1944 by Sartre in a play of his called No Exit, Huis Clos. And in that particular play, what Sartre does is to present us with three characters who have died. And so we now are seeing the characters in their afterlife. They are confined to a small room. And it isn't very long before these three characters, who are actually quite different in temperament, begin to annoy one another and sooner or later begin to actively loathe one another. They distrust one another. They all want something from the other, which they cannot get. And so they see the other as an antagonist, as an adversary, and they go round and round and round with one another for all of eternity. It's at that point where Sartre tells us, rather mordantly, that hell is other people. Hell is the others. Now, what he's trying to express, I think, in this particular play is what he argued for in his more philosophical works, particularly in Being and Nothingness. And it's this. According to Sartre, human beings are radically free, each and every one of us. But what that means is that we are also in radical competition with one another. We see the other's freedom as a threat to my freedom. What happens when this occurs is that we tend to objectify one another. We tend to turn one another into objects that we can use instead of being used by. And when that happens, says Sartre, our freedom, our subjectivity, our personhood, if you will, gets sucked right out of us. It gets sucked out of us whenever the other looks at us as an object. Sartre calls this the gaze of the other, or the look of the other, and it freezes us. It turns us into an unfree, frozen, immobile object. Symbolically, of course, not literally, but don't miss Sartre's point. Because you and I are competing freedoms, we have to try and defeat one another. Hell does become other people in this constant arena of battling back and forth to decide who is going to be the subject and who is going to be the object. In this kind of situation, love is absolutely impossible because love is only able to thrive between two subjects who assume a kind of mutuality. But in this gaze of the other arena, that simply cannot happen. And so it only stands to reason that hell indeed is other people, that other people will always threaten me, always try to reduce me to an object, and will never be lovable. This is a bleak outlook, and I think that it's just wrong. It is the case, of course, that at times we do find ourselves competing with one another. And it certainly is the case that at times we objectify one another, sometimes in relatively innocent ways and sometimes in quite atrocious ways. But I don't think that hell is other people so much as agreeing with Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, in his great book, The Brothers Karamazov, that hell is the suffering that comes from being unable to love. Let me say that again. According to Dostoevsky, hell isn't other people. Rather, hell is the suffering that arises when you and I are unable to love, or perhaps more pertinently, when you and I refuse to love. When that happens, we really do freeze ourselves. We objectify ourselves, as it were. We exile ourselves to a desolate landscape in which we experience the loneliness and the sorrow and the frustration and despair of utter isolation. You and I are made for one another. We are social creatures. We need one another. We depend upon one another for our very self-identities. We need to connect with one another. The process of connection depends upon recognition, recognition. We need to re-look at one another to see that we are beings who have rich interiorities and whose rich interiorities depend upon connection with other rich interiorities. And that connection isn't merely one of acquaintance, much less competition. It's one of shared intimacy, shared hopes, sometimes shared fears. It's one of mutual reciprocity. It's one of mutual respect and admiration. It's one of love. Dostoevsky is absolutely sure that without love, we human beings cannot thrive. Without love, we suffer the pangs of hell, isolated, lonely, desolate. And I think that's a much better characterization of what hell is than the situation that Sartre offers us. Now, if one loves human beings, one is in a better position, it seems to me, to love God. If one doesn't love other human beings, one's going to find it hard to love God. And to not love God is the ultimate isolation, the ultimate solitude, isn't it? The ultimate alienation, being trapped in a world in which one is not recognized by human beings because one doesn't recognize God. One isn't loved by human beings because one won't open oneself to their love and consequently won't open oneself to God's love. 1 John chapter 4:20 says it so well, doesn't it? How can you love God whom you don't see, if you don't love human beings whom you do see? Christians are called to be people of community, koinonia. We are called to be in communion with one another. There's that connection again. There's that recognition again. And to be in communion with one another, to be in koinonia, is also to connect ourselves with God. In the Christian tradition, God's self is koinonia. Yes, God is a communion. That's what the Trinity is all about. The Father loves the Son loves the Father, and the love that flows between them and between us and God is the Holy Spirit. No, hell is not other people. Hell is the suffering that comes from not being able to love or refusing to love other people and consequently God. So my friends, even though it is certainly the case that at times humans will annoy us and we will annoy them, it is not the case that people are hell. Hell is being in the isolation of lovelessness. I'm Father Kerry, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so very much for watching. If you are of a mind, I invite you to subscribe to Holy Spirit Moments. Take care, and I'll see you next time. God bless.